This podcast is dedicated to helping high achievers on the verge of burnout reclaim a healthier work-life balance without sacrificing growth or success. Welcome to episode 33 of Give Yourself Some Leeway, with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today I am joined by Say Gabriel as they share their personal burnout journey and how even the simplest changes in their routine may not always be the easiest ones to implement, and that they require a certain level of discipline and consistency, and that your burnout recovery journey isn't a one-off thing. If you simply recharge your batteries and return to the workplace and fall into old habits and behaviors, not only will you sabotage your own recovery journey, but you may also be affecting your colleagues, your team, your business partners, your friends, and your family. If you've been following the show for a while now, please rate 5 stars and leave a review, because this is the best way for the show to increase its visibility and be more easily found, and to leave feedback for me to improve the show for you listening. Thank you, I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Say Gabriel. We seem to follow a similar pattern when we get into coaching. There seems to be a rock bottom or a turning point or a breaking point. And from that, we have a moment of realization that leads us on a journey of recovery, of self-development and growth. And then somewhere along that line, we have this vision or spark that makes us want to become a coach. So what was that like for you, and why do you do what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that I can remember both those moments very clearly. And I think it's funny that you say that we follow a bit of a pattern, because that's definitely true. I think there's something about kind of hitting rock bottom and realizing that there's somewhere you can actually go. And that sense of empowerment creates this huge desire to share. But I'll back up a bit to my moment. So this moment came for me later on my journey overall, because I was someone who I didn't really love hustle culture or stress for many years before I hit my critical burnout moment. But I kind of had put myself in this box that I have to. There's just things going on. There's things I need to respond to. There's things I need to be on top of. And there came a point where I'd been having these physical symptoms and been feeling tired. But, my business was the thing that I loved. I was showing up every day and just really loving what I did. And that in itself kind of became dangerous because I kept pushing and pushing. And then one day I found that I just couldn't get out of bed. And the worst part was that this moment actually came after I had just taken a day off to do some work in the community and had done something that supposedly was going to fill my cup. But otherwise, it wasn't necessarily a day much different from any others, except when I woke up, this aching exhaustion that had been dogging me for a long time just overwhelmed me. And I found myself just totally unable to function. I could barely make it to the couch. I lay there basically just crying. Like, oh my God, how am I gonna do anything today? Like, my team needs me, people need me. And I threw on an audiobook because I'd already been listening to a lot of information about how to navigate stress and burnout and all this stuff. But it was just that it was a lot of information. I wanted to know whether it had any answers for me. And the author, Dr. Emily Nagoski, this book is called Burnout. And it listed basically these 4 symptoms. And it said, if you have any one of these 4 symptoms and they're severe, then watch out, because you're probably on your way to the hospital. And I lay there, just tears streaming down my face, as I realized that all 4 of them were things that I had to a maximum level for as long as I could remember. And that if I really checked in inside, I knew that I really wasn't well. I had chronic pain. I hadn't been sleeping more than 4 hours a night for all this time. And I knew, number one, I wasn't going to work that day. It didn't matter how much people needed me. I couldn't. And number 2 was that something needed to change. And it didn't matter that I'd been reading the books and trying and failing and all these to-do list stuff. I knew at that moment that it was so bad, I absolutely needed. I could not continue like that. And this is something that I've heard from a number of people, is that, like, that critical point, as you put it. But the magic of it, because, you know, I was like, okay, well, what do I do? I have all this information. And I was like, I need to figure out a system that takes all the different stuff out there instead of giving me a million more things on my to-do list of like self-care, like, oh, baths and this and that. I needed something that cohesively told me what to do now, what to do next, and helped me know that as long as I was following this path, I would continue to make progress. And I'm a system builder at heart. So I had to build it, and I did build it. Uh, and for me, it was in that process of seeing, holy cow, this works. Because over the next 2 weeks, and you know, spoiler alert, I didn't go back to work for 2 months, and my team was incredible. But again, this wasn't like something that I've been like dreaming of saying, screw you two. This was something that actually meant a lot to me. And I was so full of shame that I couldn't be present. That partially drove me to I'm going to make this my job. I'm going to make regulating myself my job. And so I started to reclaim rest, reduce stressors, and unpack baggage, which is the three parts of the system. And they have all these subparts. And within 2 weeks, I had made more progress than I had made in like 8 months of changing my diet, of doing all these big, big, big things. And the overwhelming joy and hope that came with that, where I was like, wow, I'm not doomed. I don't have to feel this way forever. As terrible as I felt 2 weeks ago, I'm already making progress. Again, spoiler alert, that was a few years ago. And I'm not at the magical point I expected that I would be with. I'm like, oh, yeah, one more week and I'll be good. Takes time. When I went back to work, when I did go back to work, I was like, I have the solution. I am God. I have good news. And I'm going to teach all of you guys this. And I immediately saw that like 3 or 4 different people on my team, including the right hand woman, were at the point that I had been. They were so critical and they didn't necessarily even know it, but I was fresh now and I did. And I realized then that I wanted to do this full time. Like this, taking that system, teaching people, lifting people up, and helping people feel the way I felt, that I was going to spend the rest of my life doing that. I knew that. Uh, and that was the second moment. That was the second moment where I decided. Yeah. Did that answer your question? That's part of my why, but that's the moment.
Yeah, exactly. It was just that spark. And one point that I really just wanted to come back to there was where it was your realization when you came up with your own system, and within 2 weeks you had made more progress than the changes you were trying to do over the last 8 months. And that kind of reminded me when I first started out, when I knew that there was something that I needed to address. And because I was so, let's say, like overachieving and just driven by achievement, I was like, I just need to get more results. And that's exactly,
Yes,
and I was like, that's what I want to
people.
feel. And I was driven towards things like, 75 hard. I had so many friends who were doing this and they were like, oh, it's great for getting mental clarity and everything. And I was like, okay, I tried it out for a few days and I was like, this is just stressing me out more and it's
Yes.
burning me out more. And I was just there like, this is not working for me. And I found that instead of trying to take on all these big things and trying to make being uncomfortable doing all these immense tasks before I even start my day, that I was meant to get all of this done before I started my day of work. I
A
was
lot of
like, why
pressure.
can't I? Exactly, so much pressure. And I was like, why can't I just start with something simple? And it started with having a glass of water first thing in the morning. And that was my first win. And it was something as small as that. And starting with that, and that was my first win for the day. And it made the rest of my day easier. And I was like, looking at something like 75 hard, where I was drinking a gallon of water every day, to, okay, I'm just going to start off my morning with a glass of water and I'm going to feel refreshed and hydrated before I start my day. And then from there, I was able to add other habits like going to the gym a couple of days a week, or maybe going for a walk, maybe doing some breath work. And it was just bringing in these small little habits and these small little changes for the
Yes.
better. So, did you
Yes.
have something
Yes. And
similar?
yes. Well, uh, I just want to turn it back around on you, just pull out some of the things that I heard in what you said, because I heard two things there that were really powerful and resonate really quite a bit with me and quite a bit with people that I know and have worked with and talked to just all around, which is start where you're at, start small and go iterative. And iteration or iterative, the adjective is a word that I did not know like 3 years ago, but now it's one of my favorite words because basically what it means is repeat and build on. So when you start small and you iterate, you do that same small thing, but the next time that you do it, you make it a little bit better. So it gives you permission to not be perfect at first. Or at all, in fact, because you're making something that's constantly growing and shifting and improving rather than making something that you're trying to be perfect right off the bat. And so you never possibly complete it. Or you get so stressed about it and about making it perfect that you don't really make progress. And I think that really was a huge part of my journey, because although, I had this 2 week incredible, result, I've actually been doing the work on some level, not just for 8 months, but for years before that. And consistently, what I found blocked me was what you're describing, trying to overachieve and be the perfect kind of like type A self-care person. I think it also can get overwhelming, all the different things, all the information that's out there, all the different things that you can do. And for me, I realized that I needed to take it one day at a time. I needed to not focus on, okay, I'm going to do this 2 month long adventure, but what am I going to do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? And just being able to focus on that and pick one or two key things. For me, it was going for a walk. I realized that I needed some catharsis. I needed movement. I needed a way to get into kind of default mode and let my thoughts process instead of overwhelming me. And so I told myself, okay, I did a minimum of 20 minutes. And often I would do 45 minutes because I just found a loop that I really liked. And I started to add things onto that. So for me, the most cathartic thing might have been going for an intense bike ride, going up this hill, doing this and doing that. But guess what? I wasn't doing it. I wasn't getting up, and I was looking at my bike and thinking, yeah, not today. But walking was something that I could do. And by figuring out, you mentioned that drinking a glass of water, from there, you were able to iterate that into going to the gym, into these other things. But even that glass of water, for me, that walk, I was able to expand on that into, okay, walk with music. Now walk maybe with some visualizations or bringing in other aspects of things that would really help me let go. And just that time that I carved out, whether that was 5 minutes or in that case 45 minutes, having that time carved out where you are focused on reclaiming rest, you're not intaking a whole bunch of new stuff or learning or achieving, you're just being and doing. That in itself was so powerful.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny how, like, let's say we're constantly, let's say, bombarded with what's the next best thing to recover
Mm.
from burnout or to deal with your mental health, and what's the best way to get mental resilience and all this. And you're completely bombarded with all different sales and marketing. And next thing when you realize it's the simple things. It's if you keep it sweet and simple, and it's just starting from literally almost the smallest. What is the easiest thing I can do right now to grow? And for me that was have a glass of water, and it was there like it almost sounds too simple. And for you it was going for a walk, and it was like, yeah, of course, going for a walk is something simple I can do, and then expanding on it from there.
I want to just be clear though, especially for listeners who are thinking, yeah, simple, great. That simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. For me, reducing it to a simple system meant that I could take on the hardness of something, because sometimes something as simple as drinking a glass of water, getting out for a walk, that can feel almost impossible to us, especially if we're already at our limit or we already have so much on and we're kind of out of push energy day to day. And I think that simplifying things, it's not that, I mean, you can definitely go for something easy and that's great. But I don't want people to get caught in a shame spiral if they're thinking, oh, well, that should be easy for me, but it's not. Because I think simplicity gives us space to face the very real challenge of even just valuing ourselves enough to take that time, to carve out that time, to not deprioritize it last minute. I guess I want to give weight to the fact that is pretty hard work, even when it's simple a lot of the time.
It's not easy. It's not easy to do it. They're simple steps, but it's not easy to constantly come back and repeat and have the right mindset to come back every day and put in the reps.
Yeah, and that comes down to commitment a lot of the time. Thing is, though, is that most of us aren't afraid of hard work. There's this kind of societal lie that people are intrinsically lazy, and I do not agree with that. And for one, there is no amount of effort a person will not go to avoid work. And, for another, I meet far, far more people like you and I who are overachievers who we may not see what they're putting the work into, but they're putting a lot of work in. And sometimes it's neither simple nor easy to kind of change those deeply ingrained patterns. So I think that, not to beat a dead horse, but by simplifying it, we make space for people, because a lot of people are just point me in the right direction. If you can give them something that, or give them a framework to explore for themselves, the thing that works for them, the thing that is going to be a little bit easier, the thing that is unavoidable, hard but unavoidable, so that okay, that's the challenge I have to get by. That clarity is so powerful, because I think that's a huge part of what I was lacking when I was doing the work for those 8 months, those 8 years, etc. Clarity was so precious, because it feels like in this information era that we're just being bombarded sometimes with so much stimulation, so much stuff. As you said, all these ads, like, relaxed now, like you're like that. This is a stressful interaction. Like, I don't know how your thing that's like flashing at me and being super loud is going to help me achieve that state of relaxation. And I think being able to sift through the noise is really critical. I find that that's the thing that I find myself doing with other people again and again. It's like, okay, I'm doing things, but are those the right things for you? Are they getting you results? Are they hugely difficult and not getting you results? It can be really easy for us to self sabotage, or just not know, or just get overwhelmed. It's a hard world. It's hard being human right now.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree with that. It's something that you just touched on there about um, when it comes to work, people being lazy and stuff. It's that from what I've experienced, is that it's because their values aren't aligned with the work. And
Yes.
once you align their values with the work, or help them to see the work in a way that aligns with their core values, they get more done. And the whatever obstacle was in their way is no longer there, or they can work through it, or they're more passionate
Yes.
about the work to do the work.
Yes, 100%. Lesson 3 of Unpack Baggage is live your values. Well, discover your values and live them. And I think that values is a term that gets tossed around a lot, but we don't necessarily all actually know what it means or agree what it means. But to me, our values are basically our intrinsic code of behavior. It's what we can live with ourselves with. Um, Not everyone is going to have the same values, but our values aren't just necessarily what we say our values are. They're really rooted in our actions. And it's not always simple. I worked in content strategy for many, many years in business consulting. I hear people's values, excellence, being a big one that comes up. Well, what does that actually mean in terms of a code of behavior? Because I find that when there's a value mismatch and things aren't working out, it tends to be because people have different ideas of what an acceptable code of behavior is. It's not just, what lights us up in our passion, it's what we believe is okay in day to day interaction. Like, when I value candor and honesty and transparency, it is because it kind of physically hurts me to not do those things. I've maybe tried over the course of my life going in other directions, and even if nobody were to ever hold me accountable for telling a lie, it just is difficult and stressful and sits with me, and so that's how I know that's a value. And so I think that's really important, I guess, just to take a few moments to define if we're talking about that alignment, especially in a work context. Because a lot of the time we think we know our values, but we may not have actually sat with them and dug a little deeper. We're just kind of inheriting values.
As a business owner, do you feel a responsibility to maybe sit down with your team and assess their values and get clarity on their values for when it comes to designating the roles within the company?
Oh, 100%. That's part of the hiring process. I would say that, in let's say it's, I guess, 8 years and dozens of hires, every single time that we have had someone that doesn't work out, it will come down to one of two things. And this is true for people we hire as well as people we work with as clients, which is either an expectations mismatch or a values mismatch. And typically it's a values mismatch. So I didn't necessarily start that way, but I found that over time, hiring and screening for values is as important or more important than hiring and screening for skills. Because, and I'll just give super general example, but let's say you run a sales team and you have that. Let's go back to my value of that candor, transparency, and let's say accountability. Well, we have all experienced or seen, especially those of us who grew up in the 90s, those sleazy kind of car salesman type people who will say anything to get the sale. If you're hiring a team of salespeople, if you're just hiring for skills, you're just hiring for how good are you at selling my thing or at selling things in general. Well, you might hire 3 people and get one person who's totally committed to customer service and doing anything to help the customer feel heard. You might get somebody who is all about those black hat tactics and kind of pressure and wallet surgery. And you might get somebody who maybe just shows up and talks and is really authentic about loving the thing and kind of invite other people to engage with them on that. And all 3 of those people might be excellent salespeople. But I can tell you that if you're starting out with that value, with those values that I talked about, and that's important for you and how the people on your team interact with each other and interact with clients, you're probably going to run into problems with the person who values getting the sale and the end justifying the means.
A very good point you made there is the fact that, and especially that I see a lot in the interview process, is that the focus is always on the skills and almost like the skills and their motive for coming to the interview is like, why do you want to work for us? And that's as
Mhm.
far as they go with values. They don't get clarity on the real values that that person holds and how those values apply to that role, to the company. And I think that's something that they find out. It could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. And it's only when they see that the person is either spiraling out of control or is getting kind of demoralized and cynical or lazy in their work that they realize, okay, maybe that person's values don't really align with the company. And it could be, it might, their values might have aligned earlier, maybe when they first joined the company, but as time went on, things could have changed in their personal life. Things could have changed. Maybe there could be a change of management or a change, maybe when they changed roles, that their values may no longer align. And at that point,
Yeah.
it is a matter of, for their sake, having that conversation with them to see, is it a matter of their values not aligning or if there's something else going on, and is it time for them to move on, or maybe it's that they've outgrown their role and it's time for them to move to a place where they can continue to grow.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a few things that you said there that were gold that I just want to kind of pull us back to. So one is this idea that if we're not careful, a hire can turn into someone who's with us for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and that this can be an ongoing problem that's simmering under the surface. I think there's 2 things that I want to speak to there. One is that when there's a values mismatch, even if it's not actively causing problems, it is almost certainly affecting the team as a whole and the team's morale and the team's productivity because there's something that just isn't going to quite sit right on either side. And that can be easy to kind of not give credit to because we want to be nice, want to give people chances, all of this stuff. But it really does kind of fester sometimes, and I think that one thing that I found that's really, really important is understanding that number one, values are a two-way street in the sense that you will learn more about your own values as a company and as an individual, which should overlap quite strongly, especially as a business owner, as you actually start to engage with people on their values. And it's not something like you can just ask somebody like, oh, what are your values? That has a limited effectiveness, as I found it can be really helpful to actually set people up with a situation, like describe a situation to them and ask them how they would respond. And once again, now you can observe, they can show you that value or a different set of values rather than just telling you, which is going to have more weight overall. And frankly, I think that you spoke to values being partially at the role level. Maybe someone has shifted roles and now their values aren't quite a fit. I personally think that values tend to come down to the company level. And what happens in a shift of roles is that we now have a different context and so a different lens through which to see their code of behavior and what we value in terms of a code of behavior. But I would argue that if somebody doesn't have the right values, it generally cannot be addressed by shifting them around in terms of maybe in a super big company, but if we're talking about companies under 20 people, under 10 people, under 5 people, the kind of small and micro businesses that I engage with day to day, I think that it's it's a little bit different. Yeah. And I think that that value difference is always going to come around and bite you on the ass at some point. But like I said, it's important for us to understand and kind of assess in a situation whether it genuinely is a value difference or whether it's just an expectations mismatch. Because sometimes we have similar values, but how we think we're supposed to execute them, that sometimes can get lost in translation. I find that works really well, kind of shifting people within the company more so.
Even if the company is 100 or 1,000, you can't just move someone from department to department or from branch to branch, because overall the company's values are still going to be the same. And if
Exactly.
it's really down to the person's core values, that's not going to change.
Yeah, and just one last piece on this, because I realize I said, it always comes down to values, but what that actually looks like, I think, is relevant to say, because what usually ends up, how do I know it's a value mismatch? How did I come to this understanding? Well, quite often we would have someone on our team, or occasionally, again, someone that we're working with in, a client provider, service provider relationship, do something that other people on the team, especially us in leadership, we almost can't fathom. Like we almost were just like, I cannot imagine doing that. And you can empathize, you can step into the person's shoes, but if there's kind of an empathy barrier there where you're like, well, I can understand intellectually why you might behave or respond in that way, but it just feels so antithetical. Like I'd have a really hard time imagining myself or someone else on the team. That's usually a cue to dig a little deeper because you might have a misunderstanding on like internally on what your values are, but there also might be a value mismatch there because their acceptable code of behavior again is just different from what you would even imagine to be kind of a default response.
When it came to talking to, let's say, about values and stuff, when it comes to your employees, it sounds like you're very, very dedicated to your company and to your employees, and you really care about how their core values align with you and the company. So when you're a business owner and when you burn out like you did, do you ever feel like you had a responsibility to be there for your employees no matter how burnt out you felt? And even on your recovery journey, that you couldn't take the time off just to focus on yourself, that you felt that there was a responsibility that you had to be there for them at the same time?
Oh gosh, are you reading my mind? It's almost like you know something about this. Yeah. So the first part of the story that I told you, I came back. I ended up taking these 2 months off. I felt, like a super. I had this new superpower, and I did want to come back and share it with my team. I'll say first of all that it took me basically being non-functional, which on that journey I realized that I have autism and ADHD, and that was kind of tied into that particular response. Um, it really took me kind of getting non-functional not to be there where I could not. But when I did come back, when I did, do some of the work and come back, that's actually when I did the most damage to myself. Because I came back and I had these incredible resources. I had this system, and I could immediately see that the other people on my team were really far gone. This was maybe a year, not even into the pandemic. Everybody's doing like shifting and twisting, and my right hand woman is a new mom at that point. Um, and uh, and at first I thought, well, this is great. I can help you. I have the answer. And I set up, a uh, weekly wellness session for the team and started kind of giving people resources and stuff. But I knew when I came back that I really needed to be working kind of 5 to 10 hours a week and kind of scale up from there. And when I came back, everybody else was just in such this critical state. And I thought that I was so fresh. Turns out that like 10, 20, 30 years of overworking and running your body down, actually, it does take more than 2 months to refill your reserves. But the processes and stuff worked. So I threw myself in, and within 3 weeks, I was working like 60 to 80 hours a week. I was working more than I had. And I was like, it's okay because I'm doing all the stuff to regulate and manage myself. And then what happened? Well, something happened and I just lost my core habit. I lost that anchor, which was walking. And everything associated with it, I just wasn't able to do it anymore. In a few days I lost the habit, and all of a sudden I was working 60, 80 hours a week, and I did not have the resources to cope. And at that point, I was so deep in it, I felt like people were starting to burn out at that point. And I felt like I had to be there and support them and all this stuff. It was kind of like running with a cast on. Like I had this injury, this burnout. My body was run down, my nervous system was run down. And I found the solution. It was like I put the broken foot, this injury, in a cast. But then I came back and I was like, great, it's healed. And I started running every day on this casted leg, metaphorically, of course. And guess what? I made the injury much worse. So that's, both that piece of context where it can be such a slippery slope to want to support others and show up for others. And it's possible, I made the mistakes, but, I did learn from them. But also that it can be a really dangerous time when we start to make progress because, and this is just another version of the same thing, I don't know about you, but when I've managed to claw back some time in my calendar when I was overworked, I've often turned around and committed to something that actually overbooked that time and was more than I had let up. It was kind of a similar challenge. And that was actually a lot harder to come back from. So, yeah, I think that that's a very common thing that I resonate very strongly with. But that I also saw in other people, their own commitment to the team, their own commitment to kind of other people. It can be very easy to really run ourselves down in the name of that.
What got me thinking about it was the fact that when I burnt out and I was able to take time off work, even though I wasn't a manager or anything or a business owner, it was that fact that I was part of a team. And when I took that time off, I felt like I was letting my team down, that they had to pick up the slack while I was gone. And even that guilt was kind of setting in. And I was meant to be taking this time to focus on myself and focus on my own recovery. But that was still kind of like an intrusive thought in the back of my mind the whole time, was like, here you are trying to take time off and focus just on you. How selfish of you. You're making the rest of the team work extra time on top of it. Of course, when it came to them, they were getting days of overtime. They're getting extra hours. It didn't make a difference. They were like, you know what, it was great that you were off. It gave us extra time to work. And but it was still in the back of my mind the whole time. I was like, I have a responsibility here. I don't take time off work. I don't take all this time for myself. I should be at work. I should be doing all those hours. And yeah, it was kind of, while I was trying to recover, I felt bad that I was trying to recover, or the fact that I had let myself go so far that I needed to recover. And hindsight is 2020 like that. That when you look back now and you're like, of course, you needed that time. You needed to recharge your batteries. You never recharged your batteries ever. And anytime you did have off, you just looked for another project. You're like, what can I do with my time off? And exactly as you said, it was like whenever you felt overworked and you finally took some time off to do something else or to recharge your batteries, you look for the next project.
100%. I think that something that you pointed to there that really jumped out at me is something that's come up a few times here, which is the additional taking on stress while trying to de-stress, like taking on stress in the name of de-stressing. I know for me that dreaded, whether it's a full-on shame spiral, whether it's just the niggling voice at the back of my head, I have had so many days, and even now I still have days where I take time to rest and I end up not resting and not working. I like rest, but I'm actually not able to let go of that stress and actually like down regulate myself to actually be able to be present and calm because I'm feeling guilty or there's something else going on. Or, for me, sometimes I end up like doing work that is not work, doing a big home project that uses all the same gears that my work does. And I think it's really, really important to just spread the word that if you are stressing yourself out trying to de-stress, you are stressing yourself out. Our bodies, the way our bodies, this awesome human machine that we're piloting through the world, the way they work is that we have green light, yellow light, and red light. We have kind of a baseline. And when we're inactivated, when we're stressed or in fight or flight mode, we can't heal ourselves. It's like there's like a yellow alarm bell clanging in our bodies. And so this is one of those things that can be simple, but not easy. Even if we accept that, yes, we are in fact human and do also need rest, and accept that, yes, it is okay to rest right now. it's not always as easy as being able to tell your body, okay, rest now, and have it listen. And so this is one of the biggest pitfalls that I fell into. One of the biggest challenges I see people facing is this idea that if I just reduce enough stressors, if I just do one more thing, if I take on one more thing, then I can finally rest. As opposed to, no, you actually most of the time need to take a break from your to do list item, from the things that are causing you the stress, to actually deal with the stress itself in your body, because stress is a body experience, it's a measurable experience in the body, and it will kill you faster than the thing stressing you out. And that is a quote from that book, from my story at the beginning. But it's very true. And most people, myself included, don't necessarily know that at first. They think, oh, stress is an emotion or a thought, but it's a lot more than that. And it affects our body systems in big ways that add up over time.
As you just said there about, let's say, instead of when we have that free time and
Mm.
instead of taking on an extra stress when we're meant to be de-stressing, it reminds me of, have you come across Adam Grant? And he does this
Mm.
he did a podcast about languishing I came
It was a
across
podcast.
once.
Oh, okay.
And
I don't think so. I was thinking of an author, so.
he could be an author. I mean, I just heard him on a podcast. But he was talking about languishing and how we kind of guilt ourselves not to take that time to do nothing, where
Mm.
we need that time to do nothing so that we can recharge. And I think he was on about, I think he had like a mental block for a few weeks. And he just took the time to, like, instead of going through the reps the whole time, trying to get through that block, he just took some time off and did nothing. And he just spent a couple of hours, he just sitting, I think he was playing with his nieces and nephews, just playing Mario Kart or something. And then in that moment, the creative juices got flowing again. And he was like, okay, now I can be productive. And it was about
Yes.
not guilting yourself about taking the time off to do nothing to recharge. Don't feel bad about playing a few hours of Mario Kart. As long as it's not every day you're spending 6 hours playing Mario Kart, that's different. But it's about giving yourself that time to recharge and
Yes.
to be more creative in yourself that way.
Yes, absolutely. So just to put what you're talking about and kind of put some language and a framework around it. So what you're describing, that he was blocked and then went and kind of did something else that didn't engage his brain fully, but gave himself permission to just kind of do and be, and all of a sudden had an aha moment. So that there's a name for that. It's called default mode. And we actually have a default mode network in our brain, which is basically like the background processes. And what happens is, like back in the day when things that we had to do required a lot of hands time. For example, for me now, that might be like doing the dishes or something like that. When your hands are occupied, but your brain isn't, you, those background processes actually clean up and work on all of the different problems. They literally solve your problems for you. If you ever had an aha moment while you're in the shower, in the bath, that's default mode at work. And so these days, because we have constant stimulation, it can be really hard to find or even create those moments for ourselves. And I know that for myself, and again, I'm a person who has ADHD, so my brain works a little bit differently, but a lot of people who lead businesses and work in certain industries are. Um, I found that the moments that would be default mode moments, I was spending ruminating. I was spending with cyclical thoughts, often guilt driven. And I was chewing on something, but like actively chewing on it and actually just like running around in circles in my head on it, as opposed to actually able to engage in that flow space where my brain is processing in the background. And it is so counterintuitive because even now, sometimes I need the right kind of stimulation mix to be able to get into default mode. And you will never get into default mode if you are intaking new information. I find that it can be so tempting to bang my head against the wall trying to solve a problem, trying to like push through that block. And if I let it go, if I just focus on rest, rest actually is productive. And if I give myself default mode, I will often have an aha moment that will just resolve a whole bunch of different stuff that I was worried about and been banging my head against the wall on for sometimes weeks or months, and it'll just click. And I'll wake up one day and be like, oh, I get it. It makes sense. And that is not because I'm a magical super genius, although I like to think that has something to do with it. But just because I've learned to workshop my default mode, and that is lesson three in my reclaim rest in the system is activate default mode. There's a few different things we can do with our bodies that way, where if we just understand kind of how the system works, we can activate it on purpose. And for instance, play Mario Kart and actually feel confident that we're being productive in that moment. It might be a different way, but we're reclaiming rest. We're giving our bodies and brains what they need, and it will make a positive impact if you are doing it correctly.
Yeah, definitely. As soon as you said default mode, it brought me back to like other similar examples. Like you're doing a crossword puzzle and you just can't get that one word. Next thing you go off, and about 2 or 3 days later, it just hits you. You're like, "There's the word." It's been in the back of your mind the whole time. Your brain has been trying to find out that word. Or you could be watching a TV show and you're like, "I know that actor's face from somewhere else," and it could be like a week later, and it just comes to your head. And you're like, that's the movie he's from. And it's just, let's say, the it's not that your brain forgets. It gets stuck in that question, but it doesn't have it at the forefront of your mind. It just goes to the back of your mind, and it's just processing, slowly processing in the back of your mind until it reclaims that information.
Yes, yes. Yeah, if listeners are interested in reading more about this, they could read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell or Deep Work. Ooh, I forget who the author of that is. But both of them go into basically how our brains process and how we can leverage this part of ourselves. Because the fact is that data shows that our default mode is actually better. It's not just me. Our default mode is better at solving problems than we are. And it can do some really remarkable things, and we really do not fully understand how it works. We just know that it does work. And so much of the time, we kind of fight this. We fight having any kind of downtime. We fight having time to just be. We fight our default mode because we think that we have to kind of be in control and be in the lead all the time. We have this incredible support system. Again, I like to think of it as a human machine because our computers, if we had to manually do every process on our computers, well, they would not be so handy. I personally do remember the days of DOS where you had to type in every file command line on its own. And for some reason, especially with the rise of AI, we're okay with relying on the default mode processes of other machines. But for some reason, we can feel shame about tapping into that marvelous, marvelous technology in ourselves, even though it really helps. And sometimes we want to, but it's just tough. We don't fully know how, or we have blocks, or we have undiagnosed neurodivergence that can change the context for us. So I encourage people to experiment with it. What are the things that just let your mind kind of float? For me, that's partially what walking does for me. I have to basically be unable to have a method of consuming information. My hands need to be busy. But for some people, it is watching a show that they've seen a million times that is very predictable and familiar for them, and it kind of lets their brain float onto other things. If you have a hard time sitting with your own brain and just sitting in silence or being, that can be something really helpful as well. But again, if you're intaking new info, your brain can't be processing the old info. It's working on the new stuff.
When it comes to self-care, what worked for you was walking, and for me, starting off, it was drinking a glass of water and things. As you build on those habits, and as you said, when you went back to work, you lost that core habit of your burnout recovery, your system. What kind of barriers do you feel are come into play, especially kind of like when you went back to work and we encounter obstacles and setbacks? How do you overcome those barriers and get back onto your core habit, or get back onto that system, that burnout recovery system that you had in place?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. I have three answers, or three kind of ways to look at it. So there will be a lot of barriers. And the first and primary reason that I think everything kind of feeds back to is muscle memory. Our brain has muscle memory too. The pathways that are familiar to us, the routines, the responses that are ingrained in us, sometimes from childhood, sometimes just from years of working in a certain way, they're real and they're tough. And I find that looking at it as muscle memory is extremely valuable because that stops you from being as quick to say, well, I'm a freaking loser because I can't get this right now. which I know that it can be really tough when you know what to do and it's a struggle to really be kind to ourselves in the way that we need to hear. We need to be kind to ourselves, but it can be much more challenging than just saying nice words. It's understanding that you have this deeply ingrained muscle memory that is different from the routines and rhythms that you need to build in order to be regulated, live a balanced life with my finger quotations, whatever that means, to be able to show up, or to get more specific, to make sure that your capacity is within your stamina bar day to day. That is to say, the things that you're doing day to day are within the energy budget that you have to spend. Um, it's important to realize that that's not the way you're currently programmed, and that it will take time to change that programming, even if you're doing the right thing. And that's not necessarily it's more obvious for some people than others, but I think that's really important context going into these other two pieces, because otherwise we can get lost. And the second piece is showing up for other people and the genuine passion and care that we have to support and serve others. I truly believe, now this is also taken from that burnout book. They have a few real just kind of zingers in terms of how they frame things. But the solution isn't self-care, it's care. It's not about us getting really, really, really good at being independent. It's about us realizing that we're social creatures and that we're all relying on each other. And so a huge barrier that I faced when I went back to work was trying to take it on myself and trying to also take on other people's stuff myself. You know, when you're starting to make progress and you see people who are struggling, it's easy to want to lift them up, but you have to put on your oxygen mask before you put on that of another. Again, just any of us who've been in an airplane have seen that, and I remind myself of that often. Our muscle memory is often deeply ingrained to suspend or ignore our own needs in order to be there to care for other people's needs. And that also makes it really, really difficult to accept help. So I think creating a dynamic with the people around you where you're lifting each other up and reminding each other and holding each other accountable is a really good way to address that, because it's not that you need to totally stop being there for other people or putting yourself out, but we can support each other, you know, especially in a work environment. I found that it can be really hard to check ourselves. When I started, being like, oh yeah, well, we value radical wellness and all of this, I thought that the hardest thing would be getting people to on board, people to want to nurture wellness and to not push themselves to burnout and all that. But the reality is that every single person on the team wanted that, but it was very, very difficult for any one of us to do that for ourselves. So knowing that you can support each other and at home too, that's really, really critical, I think. And the third barrier that I see people run into, other than what we mentioned, which is just taking on too much, like that capacity piece, where it's like, oh, you get a little slice, and all of a sudden you want to overfill it with other stuff, with other projects. I think is measuring results, because first, it may not be as linear as you might expect. Some things get worse before they get better. A lot of things, especially if you think, again, building muscle memory. Let's think on a physical level. We're building muscle memory. If I am learning to run 5K, I'm not going to get up and run 5K that first day unless I've already been doing something like that, because it's going to be totally exhausting. I'm going to burn myself out. I have to work up to that. I have to build that up over time. But if I'm exercising, I haven't exercised for a long time, I'm probably going to be kind of sore, especially in those early days as I'm working it up. It may not be like, wow, running is this gorgeous, incredible thing. It might be like, wow, my legs hurt. And that doesn't mean that you should stop running. It just means that you have to be careful that you're finding the balance between not overdoing it and facing the necessary discomfort. And I think that word discomfort is really powerful, because change is really freaking uncomfortable. And a lot of the changes that we need to make, a lot of the deeply ingrained processes and expectations of the workplace, of families, a lot of them are crumbling and changing right now. And they need to, that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that the new way, even if you want it, isn't deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And so making sure that we're measuring results basically tells us whether that discomfort is worth it. Because at first I was doing all this stuff, but I wasn't really checking in on what I wanted to achieve or whether I was making progress. So some stuff was, it got worse before it got better, and some stuff was just getting worse. And I wasn't noticing because I hadn't set a marker for what success is. And I wasn't using that marker to gauge all around me. And I wasn't using that marker to gauge what was necessary discomfort, good pain, as we would say, and what was just pain, what was just me pushing where I really probably shouldn't have, or where it might have had bad consequences. So I know that covers a lot of ground, but I think those three, the muscle memory, good pain versus bad pain, and uh, giving and accepting care and being aware that we need reciprocity, not just to be an island and to be perfect at self-care.
If anyone wants to, let's say, get in touch with you and hear more about your program or your coaching and your system, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website, which is growmightyleaders.com, or you can email me, say, S-A-Y, at growmightyleaders.com. If you're interested in working personally together and having someone to help you understand that friction, where you're getting blocked, and help you get through that, or even if you're just feeling overwhelmed and want to simplify it, that's definitely something that we can talk about, something we can work together on. We have lots of different kind of ways of teaching and training. That being said, though, I welcome people to reach out to me just to share. If something about this really resonated with you, or if you're like, I actually disagree with that and think that you're wrong, I really cherish and value those conversations, because I think that it can be really lonely on a journey. And even just being able to know that someone out there is on the journey and further ahead and going to be able to real talk. Yeah, I love hearing people's perspectives. So yeah,
That's brilliant. And yeah, I'm the same. I love when people reach out after the show and maybe they don't agree with what we have to say, or maybe they aren't comfortable with the things that we mentioned, and they're like, hey, that triggered me and I don't like the way you phrased that. And I'm like, great, let's have that discussion. And that's one of the things
discomfort.
Exactly, the discomfort. And it's in that discomfort. A lot of people come back to me and they're saying, like, I wasn't comfortable with what you just said, and I don't want you talking about that anymore. And I'm like, okay, if that made you uncomfortable, it's all the more reason that we need to normalize having this conversation. Because a lot of the time it's when we're talking about mental health, and people aren't comfortable or they feel vulnerable, and they don't want to open up about talking about their mental health or their stress or their burnout. But it's only by having these conversations that we can normalize it and be like, it's okay not to feel okay. This is how we deal with the situation. This is how we can recover from it and become more resilient. Some people don't like using the word resilient, but I feel like yeah, it's about being able to adapt to stress and to achieve your full potential without being set back by obstacles like stress and overwhelm.
Yes. Reaching your full potential. That's really powerful. I also really like the word freedom, because I perceive that the only true freedom is the freedom to actually act and exist and respond from our personal values and perspectives, rather than from the ways that we're programmed, the ways that we're coded, our defensiveness. And I think that for me, the ultimate goal, because I guess thing number 4 on that list of barriers people face, which I think most people know this, is that stuff doesn't stop coming. Just because we are more resilient or we're doing better, that doesn't mean the world stops and that we don't have more intense, huge stuff to deal with. And so for me, the ultimate measure of success that I've come to over the years is, even with things continuing to come my way that are hard, that are challenging, that are unpleasant, am I continuing to move more towards having my role in life be within my capacity, in feeling regulated mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, day to day, environmentally even? And am I able to continue to make progress and continue to see myself moving more towards the person I want to be, even amidst the muck and the crap that comes our way, and that a lot of people I know are facing right now, not just me. So other people, maybe you resonate with that, maybe you don't, but I think that's really important for me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, please rate and review wherever you're listening to this, because it helps improve the rating of the show and makes it more easily found by others like you. Also, if you could take a minute to share this with family, friends, or a loved one, because if you found value from this episode, they may benefit from hearing this too. And what better way to help break the stigma around mental health than by opening a space for discussion with those closest to you? If you have any feedback or questions about today's episode or the show in general, or maybe you have ideas for topics that you want me to cover in the future, you can reach out and book a call with me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com or send me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. I read everything myself and usually I respond within a day or so. And I love getting feedback from listeners because this podcast is a learning process for me too. And your feedback is the best way that I can improve this for you. So until then, have an amazing day, and I really look forward to talking to you sometime. Until next time, take care.